Hey babes, and welcome to Gore&Gossip. I'm Nicole.
And I'm Jordan, and this is your weekly deep dive into all things terrifying, true crime cases, cold-blooded killers, and the occasional creepy conspiracy.
Plus, haunted dolls, cursed mirrors, and that one time your aunt swore her house was built on a portal to the underworld.
If it's bloody, bizarre, or just plain bone-chilling, we're talking about it.
And yes, we're bringing the gossip too, because what's a murder without a little side-eye?
So lock the doors, light a candle,
and let's get into it. Alright guys, I know, it's been a little bit. We are back though. The holidays have been crazy, and I hope everybody is having good holidays right now. It's just been a lot going on.
It's been crazy, to be honest. It's been wild. We've been in different states. We've been across the country. I've been in Montana.
Mm-hmm.
You've been in all of the states across near the Pacific Ocean. So it's just been a lot. It's been a lot, but we're back.
Yeah.
And I'm very excited for the McStays part 2.
Yes. So we are doing the McStays part 2 today. So let's get into it because this is going to be a long one. I tried to wrap this up for you guys as much as I could. There's just so much information about everything that happened here and in those 3 years that I tried to I basically had to cut some stuff because it's just a lot. So we'll get into it. Let's do a quick recap. Oh my god. Sorry, I can't speak. I still can't speak, guys. I never learned. I'm sorry. It's been a few weeks, so let's do the recap real quick. So Joseph and Summer McStay, along with their 2 boys, Gianni and Joseph Jr., were a seemingly happy family who had just moved into their new home in Fallbrook, California. They were busy painting, renovating, and settling in until February 4th, 2010, when they suddenly vanished. For 11 days, no one heard a word from them. Family and friends tried calling, texting, emailing, nothing. Joseph's brother, Michael, kept insisting the family probably took a spontaneous getaway, even though Joseph wasn't even answering business calls and his emails were piling up. Now, if you remember, even this was something that they had done before, not for this long, but it was something that they had done. They had previously gone on a spontaneous trip and then told everybody, but they would tell people. They'd be like, oh, sorry, we went away. And Joseph would still answer business calls and emails here and there while he was away. So that was weird. It wasn't until February 13th that Michael and Joseph's business partner, Chase Merritt, finally checked the house. Inside, they found unfinished renovations, food left out, toys scattered, and the family dogs left outside. All signs that something was very wrong. 2 days later, the McStays were officially reported missing. So 2 days from the day that they went to that house to finally being reported missing. So 11 days total of nobody knowing, of them just not being reported missing at all. From there, things only got stranger. Their white, I forget how to say that. Their Isuzu. Oh my god, I don't even remember how to say that. Their white trooper. We'll go with that. I'm so sorry. I literally cannot remember how to pronounce that word right now, the name of the car brand, and it's not going to come to me. I'm going to tell you right now, it's not going to come to me. It's not. This is not one of those days for me, guys. I literally have been talking about, okay, we're in a side note really quick. I've been watching Heated Rivalry, and I've been talking about it a lot on TikTok, and if you've seen any of those videos, you know that in the beginning of them, every single time I'm like, Heated Rivalry, because I literally cannot say it. This is one of those words. It's just not going to come to me. We'll just accept it and move on. Sorry.
Also a really great TV show. I do recommend you watching.
I'm in the middle of reading the books right now. Fantastic.
So good. Okay.
So their white trooper turned up abandoned near the Mexican border. A grainy video showed a family of 4 crossing into Mexico, but there was no positive ID on this. Joseph's other business associate, Dan Kavanaugh, if you remember, this is the guy who his dad called the hacker because he does all of the online, he ran the online website, which is what they thought, but Dan says he ran more than that he was like a co-owner of the business. He had access to Joseph's PayPal, which he claims that he also had access to, and took almost $8,000. That was to pay, according to him, his rent in Hawaii. He said that Joseph was supposed to pay him money for Hawaii payments. There was like multiple charges of a request of charges for his PayPal to Joseph, which were never accepted. I think I get into that again in a little bit, so we'll get right back into that. But ultimately, he ended up getting payments because he went into the account and took $8,000. Chase Merritt just kept giving interviews and talking about Joseph, often in past tense. And crucial evidence inside the home was lost after Joseph's mother cleaned the house before police could get a warrant. Because remember, this was not being treated as a homicide case or a serious this was considered a voluntary missing persons case. So they had no warrant to search the home. Remember, they entered the house on a technicality that when they did the initial sweep of the home of the what's it called, of the well check, they forgot to check the garage. So then they entered the home through the garage, basically on a technicality, to be able to look again. And when they looked again, it was very different because Joseph's mother had already cleaned the house. By mid-February, the case had gone national. There was rumors, theories, supposed sightings everywhere. And that's basically where we left off. So let's dive back in. By the time the McStay family had hit national news, the story had started to drift from reality to speculation. Tips were pouring in. Sightings were being whispered. People swore that they saw Joseph in Mexico, Central America over the summer. The boys were being spotted at beach resorts somewhere playing. And for the investigators, the border footage became somewhat of a lifeline. It gave hope that the family could be safe, that they just left, because it was the easier option. Because that was just what they wanted to believe. Families don't just vanish like that. 4 people, they don't just up and vanish like that without
something bad,
right?
Being the start
exactly.
Of it.
Some kind of something bad happening, whether they vanish altogether because of something bad coming for them or something bad happened to them. For 3 years, the McStay family stayed missing. Not murdered, not abducted, just gone. But what happened in those 3 years that nobody could find them? Well, for starters, Susan Blake and Michael McStay tried to keep the business going after Joseph's disappearance. Joseph's father, Patrick, mentions this in the Discovery documentary. If you guys remember Two Shallow Graves, you remember Joseph's father is in that, and so is Chase Merritt. I never finished the documentary. I'm really sorry about that, but I did read the book.
So good. Just an FYI.
What did you say?
It's so good.
Oh, did you? Did you finish it?
I did. Because I needed to know.
Yes. So just because I already had all of my information, I never watched it, but or never finished watching it. But what I did watch was most of it, and it was really, really good. There's a lot of great stuff in there, and it gives you a different point of view, which is very interesting and made me so skeptical of literally everything. And the book, I'll come across its name again in here because I do bring it up again, but the book that I read, that I got a lot of information from, oh my god, guys, it's literally just a wealth of information about this that just is mind-boggling. I'll say it again in a couple minutes. I know it's in here again. I definitely mentioned it all over. But anyway, Patrick alleged in that Susan and Michael, didn't want Patrick a part of it, and that they pushed him out because he didn't want them to take over the company. He also had said in that documentary that to this day, he still does not talk to them. Like, they had a horrible falling out. He still does not talk to them, from my last understanding. But it wasn't just Susan and Michael that were involved. Chase Merritt was there as well. Michael had renewed EIP, so if you remember, Earth Inspired Products was the name of of Joseph's company. He had renewed the website domain name, registered it as a new DBA, and opened a new bank account on March 16th at Chase Bank, where he added his mom as a signer to be able to write checks and have access to the account. Now, if you remember a little bit, Joseph, right before everything happened, or a little bit before everything happened, before he went missing, he had opened a new bank account with his dad re-signed to it. So his dad had initially been signed to the initial bank accounts because Patrick had initially been signed to the initial bank accounts because he was helping Joseph get everything started and off the ground. He came off of that, and then Dan had access, and I believe Chase had access to that. According to Dan, Joseph had wanted to push Dan out, so he had opened a new bank account that Dan didn't have access to. So now nobody but Patrick, I thought, had access to that, but I think Patrick also came off of that. Don't quote me on that because I can't remember, but I think I talked about it again. Okay, so they opened a new bank account on March 16th where he added his mom as the co-signer so she could write checks and everything. Now, I know that seems sketchy, but it does make sense when you consider the fact that nobody had access to that other bank account that there was money in, like I said. So they were having an issue getting money out of there. And honestly, that did make sense to me, because if they're going to try to keep everything going, they can't get access to the main account where all the money is. They're going to need to open a new one to keep working. But Dan Kavanaugh was also still involved at this point. And obviously he did have some kind of access to the one account. So there was still a lot of money in the one account. If he was able to send himself over $2,000 to cover his rent while he was in Hawaii. Now, I know I said $8,000 before. There was more there, right? There was more that he did. So why didn't they just ask him? And there really isn't an answer for that. It's just a question that I was asking myself, kind of, because they don't really ask him about it. They don't really talk about it. They just started a new bank account and they didn't touch those. Does it make sense? Are there logical answers as to why? Yeah, because obviously if something were to come up with the investigation, those bank accounts would be looked at. And if they need to keep things moving with the company, they need a new bank account to kind of just keep things clean. That would be a logical answer for me, at least. At least I would accept that. I'd be like, okay, you know what, on the business aspect, so that nothing's getting messed up, you don't want to touch anything in those accounts because you want to be able to see all of the transactions that happened even after Joseph had passed, but you don't want to create any more problems. Let's just make a new bank account for the company. I could accept that as an answer.
It's an okay answer.
Yeah, I could accept that as an answer. It would make sense to me. If somebody told me that, I would be like, you know what? I feel like that does make sense. Because you don't want to mess anything up further with the investigation. Further. Because Suzanne
just had to clean the house. Why?
I know. I'll never get over that. I never understand that. From about mid-March to late May, Susan, Michael, Chase Merritt, and Dan Kavanaugh all worked together for EIP. But it wasn't without issue. Susan and Chase had gone over to Dan Kavanaugh's apartment in March for a meeting that went so bad, Susan never had a meeting with the two men together again. And of course, there are different versions of what happened. Susan said that Merritt kept asking Kavanaugh for more money and to complete jobs. Kavanaugh kept refusing until the two of them were just screaming at each other. Merritt says that he had suggested Susan take the sales side of the business like Joseph used to handle. So she basically take over for Joseph. That Merritt continue his work because he still does what he does, which is build everything. And Kavanaugh handle the phones and basically what he would handle before, which is like the online store and everything. But Kavanaugh wouldn't do it because he was constantly sleeping until noon and never returned calls. Apparently, this was something that had already been discussed prior to the meeting, but Kavanaugh refused. And again, though, this is according to Chase Merritt. Now, Merritt quoted Kavanaugh as saying, "No one is taking over shit. You're a dime a dozen. There's only one of me." So basically, Chase is saying that Dan said, I can literally get anybody off the street to do your job, but there's only one of me who can run this show, and you're not taking over anything. Okay. Kavanaugh, when asked about this exchange, said that Merritt threatened to throw him over a balcony. Okay, very extreme.
Very extreme.
Chase,
but
of course, had a different version of this, where he claims he said that Dan was lucky he wasn't someone else because anyone else would throw him over that effing balcony, is what he said. So lots of back and forth. There's a lot of confusion.
Yes.
Susan basically just said that they bickered. There's no, like, there's no saying that they didn't. Obviously, they're all saying that they did. It's just different versions on how it happened. And what was exactly said. And there's always going to be a he said, she said, he said, she said, they said, whatever.
Yeah.
Kind of an argument when it comes to an argument, because everybody's going to have their own versions, right?
Totally.
You, me, and the truth, right?
Right.
This wasn't the last time throughout this whole, March to May that this happened. Merritt had even had it out with Susan at one point, saying that she was wrecking lives by not stepping up in the business, and she was basically just holding it back. So he went at her saying that, like, she was holding the business back and that she was wrecking lives because, like, they needed money, they had to pay for things, like, he needed a paycheck, and, like, she was just wrecking everything.
That's kind of harsh.
I don't know if she was or not, but, like, if you're somebody who's, like, a worker for a business and something happens and you have people who take over and say, I'm going to take over to, like, keep the business going so you can keep getting paid, and then you're not getting paid, I can understand being upset. We had a little side quest real quick. We were confused on what was being said. Anyway,
me.
Basically, we were just talking about when this took place. Like, if it was, like, after Joseph had disappeared, which it was, and that, like, obviously the way Susan was handling things would kind of make sense because she's also dealing with the disappearance of her son and her grandchildren and her daughter-in-law. Even though, if you guys remember, Joseph's family really didn't like Summer that much. But, like, she's still a missing person, right?
She is.
I feel like she does not get talked enough about.
No, she doesn't
at all.
No, it's just mostly about the family.
Yeah,
like the
her
boys
and her mom, like, and family, like, deserve a little bit more. They were very upset. I do talk about them a little bit, but they were also very upset. Anyway, we'll get back on track now. I'm sorry, guys.
So sorry.
There were a few jobs that had started before Joseph's disappearance, and Susan did allow Chase to continue taking those jobs, like continuing them, as well as taking on new jobs. So he had work from her, remember, from March until May. So in March, he basically approached her when she had decided with Michael to take over, and he said, listen, there's jobs that we're in the middle of. They had a really big job, one for, like, Saudi Arabia or something like that. It was a really, really big job. And he was like, listen, we need to finish these jobs. And she was like, go ahead, you can still finish them. Records showed that she had paid him $5,410 in checks between March and May, and then paid him $19,700 from the Chase account that her and Michael had opened between April and May. So she paid him, like, basically $5,400 out of her own money. So, like, those checks were her own money. And then when the money came in from those jobs, she paid him, like, I guess basically what he was owed, of, like, the full $19,000 that he was now owed from that.
Right.
From those jobs. Because remember, I just said one of those was, like, a really big job for, like, this really big it was like Saudi Arabia, has something to do with Saudi Arabia. I don't remember exactly, but the jobs themselves were not important, so I didn't really put those in here, but it was a big job that he had to do. She also had paid Kavanaugh $2,800 from, I believe, the Chase account. In May, Susan walked away from the business, her and Michael looking to focus on family instead. So in May, Susan and Michael had pretty much said, like, we've had enough. We don't want anything to do with this anymore. There's just too much going on. We don't want to deal with this. My son and my brother are still missing. You know, his family's still missing. We don't want to do this. We just want to focus on ourselves. So they left. And this left Kavanaugh with the business basically all to himself, which is basically what he wanted. He like wanted to take over this company from like the get, basically, since his involvement.
Day one.
Yeah. So this is basically what he wanted. Since Detective Dugall had to work without search warrants, if you remember him, he's the one that's been like a big part of this case. And remember, like I had also said, they were treating this as a voluntary missing person case, not possible homicide. He had to work on basically voluntary basis for financial records, basically for any information. It was all voluntary. Like people had to like willingly be giving them information. So he had written a few like letters basically, or emails to some banks, and a few banks did respond to his request. They really didn't leave a lot of note, though. There was really nothing of note there. Then he wrote to PayPal and he asked for records from PayPal. And they did agree, and they sent a CD of the records that they had. There was a request. This is what I was talking about earlier. There was a request Kavanaugh had sent on February 3rd that was ignored. Then there was a few more either canceled or denied up until February 10th. So from the 3rd to the 10th, he had sent a few requests to Joseph to this PayPal account, and they were either canceled or denied or just ignored. February 10th, there was a request to change Joseph's password. It was reset, and then Kavanaugh received multiple payments from the 10th until Joseph was reported missing on the 15th. That totaled he received was $7,900. So that's where we were getting that well, actually there's an extra 1,000 that we're kind of missing. That there's an extra 1,000 that was in there. That was for, if you remember my little shock about Joseph having another child. Elijah was his older child that he had with his previous wife, Heather. There was a child support payment. Kavanaugh did make that payment, and when he was asked about it, he claimed that Susan and Michael gave him the okay to continue the child support payments for Elijah. Why did they have the okay to continue out of this PayPal account that they did not have access to?
That seems sus.
Now, I will say, if he did know anything about Elijah, he did know that Heather was supposed to be receiving child support. I don't think that that's the worst thing in the world that she received it. I just think it's a little sketchy.
It's a little sketchy.
Why are you, like, it was like you were trying to make it look like he was still there by, like, automatically doing that.
Yeah, that's where my mind goes. It seems like you're trying to make him seem like he's still alive. I don't know.
Exactly. So, like, that's where my mind went. And now, remember, the last day that they were seen was, or spoken to, was February 4th. That's the day that they're considered missing, is February 4th. So why were their requests denied and canceled to the 10th as well?
Yeah, that doesn't.
Yeah. That doesn't make any sense. Yeah. But despite Dan's claims, after being basically a co-owner, a fellow company Joseph did a lot of work for had spoken to Detective Dugall, and said that no, he was a hired worker, not a co-owner. By June 2010, and this was a business that they did like a lot of work with. Like it was a business that they basically bought stuff from. So like they worked with them on a like weekly, daily basis, pretty much. Like they bought their goods and materials from this company. So like this person would know a lot about like
What's going on?
the dynamics of that of IEP.
Yeah.
By June 2010, Dugall had shifted his attention to Merritt, though. He said, "Let's take a look at the business as Chase, the worker, right? Chase is the one that does it all for him. He's the one that puts all of these things together. He worked closely with Joseph. He said that they were like best friends. They were like brothers. Let's take a look at there." Dugall had received a complaint from a customer of EIPs, saying that Chase was supposed to install 2 fountains for her, and he never did. The customer was from Guy's Construction, who Merritt was supposed to install the fountains for, was trying to see what her legal options were, as she had already paid Chase $6,250 as a deposit on an order that was over $12,000. So she had already paid Chase a deposit. He was supposed to come and do the work, and then she would pay him the rest. And he never went to install those 2 fountains. Dugall had reached out to Kavanaugh about this, and Dan said that he gave Chase $5,000 out of his own personal checking for materials for that project. So Chase is just asking people for money right now, is what it's looking like. Is that he's just telling people he needs money, and that he has to, you know, he needs more, and then he doesn't do anything. There was basically a runaround during this time, is basically what like I just said. He would just look to get paid anywhere he could. And Kavanaugh was also just paying himself out. He would just pay himself out and trying to like oust Chase by telling clients that he didn't work for EIP anymore. And if he continued doing jobs for them, the EIP couldn't guarantee the work. So like Kavanaugh is paying himself here. Chase is just asking everybody for money, and then Kavanaugh is going around and telling everybody he doesn't work for me anymore. He doesn't work for this company anymore. And if you get work from him under the guise of saying it's done by EIP, I can't guarantee that work because I'm telling you he doesn't work here. So
Oh my God.
They're all just trying to get paid to live. But they're both doing it crazily, and like they're just ruining the business at this point.
They're doing it in the worst way possible.
Literally. Like you could have just worked together, but you're all sketchy as hell.
There shouldn't be 3 different PayPal accounts. I'm sorry, for a business.
Yeah, like why? Not even just PayPal, but bank accounts, period. And like, why is everything going through? I don't understand the whole PayPal thing, but maybe that's just me. So Susan Blake and Patrick McStay were pretty like vocal about their concerns, because while this is all going on, the McStay family home is just empty. There's nobody there. People are hoping that they're going to return, and there's just nothing. Susan especially had pushed back against the idea that her son would abandon his children, his business, and his responsibilities without warning. But investigators weren't convinced yet that a crime had occurred. According to Rother, this is the book that I was talking about. She wrote the book Down to the Bone. This hesitation kind of mattered. Like it really mattered in this case, because of the fact that they were not willing to label this as a possible homicide or as anything more than voluntary missing, it just made all of the evidence fade. Police waited for signs of life, but evidence was just aging, memories were fading, and leads were just going cold. By 2011, the McStay case had lost momentum. Investigators were no longer actively pursuing leads with urgency. The case wasn't closed, but it wasn't moving forward either. So it was basically becoming a cold case. Sightings still came in. People still claimed to see Summer in Mexico. Others swore they spotted Joseph in Central America still. Some still claimed to see the boys at beach resorts. None of it checked out. But these tips did something dangerous. They reinforced the belief that the family might still be alive. That belief And especially that belief that that video, that grainy ass video like footage of a family of 4 crossing over the border, which like how many families of 4s do we see cross over that border like on a daily basis?
Probably so many. I can't imagine.
Literally. So because of that, that just delayed very difficult decisions and just everything started to fade. By the 3rd year, though, the tone shifted. People stopped asking, "Where are they?" and started asking, "What really happened? What happened to this family of 4 people and of 2 little boys?" Susan Blake, over the 3 years, was very, very vocal about this. She publicly criticized law enforcement. She questioned why the case never escalated. It was emotionally brutal for the families. Hope hadn't disappeared, but had curdled into something heavier, something quieter. And then slowly, investigators began reconsidering the possibility that they had been wrong. 3 years of waiting fractured relationships. Susan and Patrick, as I had mentioned, grew increasingly frustrated with the investigation. They felt ignored, dismissed, treated like overreacting parents. Meanwhile, they weren't speaking. Like I said, they had a spat, and they still didn't. They didn't speak for. They still don't speak, from my understanding. They had worked separately on the investigation. Susan even hired a PI at one point. She tried to hire a private investigator at one point. Michael McStay stayed largely quiet publicly. According to Down to the Bone, he maintained that Joseph could have taken the family away without telling anyone. Sir, this is now 3. You think your brother just up and left with his wife and children and didn't tell anybody? He was so close to Patrick. Literally, I had like tears in my eyes from the documentary of Patrick talking about how often the two of them would talk. They would talk weekly. The whole reason that Patrick had like harassed Michael in the first place was because he thought about something that felt funny and like called Patrick or called Joseph to like tell him that, because he was like, oh, that he like saw something and he was like, he would love this, and like called him and he wouldn't answer. And then he was like, that's weird, I'll try him again tomorrow. And then did that for 2 days and he was like, maybe I'm just missing him. And then he was like, no, I'm not missing him anymore. Like some things were definitely wrong. Like I'm not just missing him every time. That belief, though, had caused tension between him and other family members, i.e., I'm pretty sure him and his father. And remember, Patrick is Michael's actual biological father. Joseph and Michael are steps. So that's not Michael, that's Patrick is not Joseph's actual like biological father. He met Patrick when he was a kid, and Patrick just fell in love with him. Like he fell in love with Susan. Even after him and Susan had split, they had stayed like father and son, basically. Like that relationship never went away.
That's cool.
Summer's family had also struggled, and like I said, they're not talked about enough, in my opinion. Her mother, Blanche, her siblings were all left watching their daughter and grandchildren slowly fade away from the public eye. Tips dried up, media attention shifted. And Chase? While the McStays were frozen in time, Chase Merritt wasn't. He remarried, he worked, he maintained control over business-related finances. Now he rarely started to speak about Joseph unless he was prompted, quote unquote. When he did, he would often frame himself as a victim, as someone left in the dark, confused, and unfairly scrutinized. And believe me, did he look for that chance to talk? That's why I said prompted, because he looked for any excuse to talk about it. He inserted himself in the conversation many times and tried to keep himself relevant in it. His behavior didn't trigger any immediate suspicion because there was no murder to investigate yet, remember. By 2013, detectives started to re-examine the case with fresh eyes. They decided to re-look at it. They re-looked at financial records. They re-interviewed witnesses. They scrutinized Chase Merritt more closely, and suddenly the timeline wasn't making sense to them. Joseph had been planning renovations. Summer had appointments scheduled. The boys had their routines. Nothing about their lives suggested a clean break. I mean, the house was in a complete disarray with food left out. They had popcorn, like half-eaten apples, like there was stuff out, man. And then came November 11th, 2013. Any illusion or hope that the family was alive and well ended. And the way it was discovered, pretty shocking and kind of random, honestly. There was a man riding his motorcycle through a remote area of the Mojave Desert near Victorville, California, and he noticed something unusual sticking out of the ground. At first, it didn't register as human. He wasn't sure what it was. The desert is full of debris, trash, animal bones, scraps of metal, things half buried and bleached by the sun all over the place. But this looked different to him. Wrong. The shape, the color, he just wasn't sure. But when he got closer, he realized it wasn't trash. He saw it. It was bone. Human bone. Skull, to be more accurate, as when he made the call to the police, that's what he said he saw.
Oh my God.
I couldn't imagine just like going for a drive through the desert and like taking it like a stopping real quick, or just like seeing something off the path and just being like, that looked weird. First of all, I probably wouldn't stop, to be quite honest with you, because if I saw something that looked weird, I would be like, that's maybe I'll call while I'm driving, but like, no, it would scare me to stop. I've seen way too many like scary things.
There's no way that I would stop at all.
No, I'd probably be so scared. When the San Bernardino County Sheriff's Department got to the scene, because that's the area that they were in, they quickly realized that this wasn't a single set of remains. There were multiple shallow graves, so that's where we get the name Two Shallow Graves from, scattered across a small area of desert terrain. The ground had been disturbed years earlier and then left exposed to erosion, wind, and time. The remains were not... Here's the thing, guys. A desert is going to expose secrets at some point because there's just so much... I think sandstorms, just wind, it's going to move around. It's going to expose things in time. Even if it's not right away, it's going to expose things. The remains were not deeply buried. So right off the bat, that's, going to be... You're not getting far with that. They had been placed just below the surface, shallow enough that the desert itself eventually betrayed whoever put them there. But the Mojave Desert doesn't keep secrets forever. Like I just said. Investigators found skeletal remains in varying states of exposure. Some bones were partially buried, others were exposed entirely. Some had shifted due to weather and animal activity. Personal items were sparse. Time and elements had stripped down the site to the bare minimum. What was immediately clear, though, was this. These bodies had been there a long time. Years. And the placement suggested haste, not care. As forensic observers began examining the site, a terrifying realization crept in. These weren't just two adult-sized remains. There were smaller ones, child-sized. According to Down to the Bone, this is the moment when the gravity of the situation became undeniable. This wasn't a lone homicide, and this wasn't an accident. This was a family. And suddenly, the McStay case, dormant, stagnant, drifting, snapped back to life in the worst possible way. The remains were transported for forensic analysis. At this stage, investigators were cautious with public statements. They knew what the desert was telling them, but confirmation had to come through science. So they had to confirm that this was actually them before they could say anything. Dental records were requested. Medical histories reviewed. Anthropologists examined bone structure and age markers. The process took a few weeks. For the families, it was unbearable. They had waited 3 years for answers, and now they were waiting again, this time hoping against hope that somehow, some way, this wasn't them. Dental records confirmed what everyone else feared, though. The remains belonged to Joseph McStay, Summer McStay, Gianni McStay, and Joseph McStay Jr. I'm sorry. Reality set in. The McStays had not gone to Mexico. They had not started a new life. They had been dead the entire time.
Oh my God.
I know. It's so sad, and it's so disgustingly sad to think about those two little boys, especially. I can't even. I'm going to talk about it in a second. It's a lot. Because of the condition of the remains, full autopsies were kind of limited, but not impossible. They were able to gather information. According to Rother, forensic pathologists were able to determine cause of death based on skeletal trauma. So Joseph and Summer's skulls showed severe blunt force trauma, repeated blows, not accidental, not singular. The pattern was consistent with a heavy object, something like a sledgehammer. The children's remains showed trauma as well. Smaller skull, smaller bones, same force. Prosecutors would later argue that the injuries suggested the children were likely killed after their parents were already dead. And that was heartbreaking. It makes me want to throw up. Like, disgusting.
I'm so disgusted right now.
Yeah. This is so disturbing that jurors were visibly affected by this and during the trial years later. Because remember, so this is 2013, right? The trial still doesn't happen like anywhere near this time yet. It happens a few years later. The location itself raised immediate questions. The Mojave Desert was not random. Obviously, it was chosen for a reason. It was remote, yes, but it was accessible. It was known to locals, familiar to people who rode dirt bikes or spent time off-road. This wasn't a spontaneous dumping ground. It was chosen. One that remains were identified. Once the remains were identified, everything changed overnight. The case was no longer about a missing family. It was about 4 murders. Investigators re-examined every assumption they had ever made over the past 3 years. Every delay, every overlooked red flag. Okay, there we go. Financial records were reopened. Cell phone data was reanalyzed. Interviews were revisited and looked at with a different lens. But one name throughout everything kept resurfacing, and that was Chase Merritt. For 3 years, people had imagined the McStays alive somewhere. Now they had something else to imagine. Or had another image, I guess I should say. Their final moments. The fear, the betrayal, and for Gianni and Joseph Jr., lives that had barely had a chance to begin. Which is, again, disgusting, makes me want to throw up. The case was officially reclassified as a quadruple homicide, and San Bernardino County Sheriff's Department investigators coordinated with this with San Diego County authorities because obviously it was originally with the missing persons in San Diego, but they were found in San Bernardino. So they worked together on this, which is like, good job, because we know that doesn't happen often.
Yeah.
Since the McStays had vanished from Fallbrook, but their remains were found in San Bernardino County. Okay, I don't know. I just said that and I just repeated myself. I'm sorry. This mattered because now 2 agencies were combining their efforts and combing through all of the steps and the years of missteps on the San Diego counties, mistakes, basically. So now they had fresh, legitimately fresh eyes to relook at this. It also helped with like compromised evidence and incomplete timelines. According to Down to the Bone, detectives were painfully aware that whatever answers they were going to get would have to come from records, patterns, and basically people, because there was no physical evidence. The house had been cleaned, the cars had been processed, and years earlier, and the scene was gone. So like they had whatever they had originally taken from the cars. They had what was left over from the house, which was literally nothing because Susan cleaned it. So everything for them was basically just gone. It was literally just like looking at patterns and basically financial records for them. So investigators turned to what couldn't be erased as easily, like I said. They reconstructed the last confirmed day of the McStay family lives on February 4th, 2010, basically minute by minute. They re-pulled cell phone records, credit card logs, bank statements, emails, and any internet activity that they could basically find. What stood out immediately was how abruptly everything just stopped. No outgoing calls, no emails, like no logins, no digital footprint. For a family that was supposed to be starting a new life, that was doing renovations, that had appointments, that had lives, running a business, they just basically vanished in a way that made no sense to everybody. Like it just stopped. This is where the case truly started to narrow in. Investigators revisited Earth Inspired Products financials with a homicide lens. So they started to look at it a little bit differently. And what they found was staggering. So now that they're actually paying attention to these records, it looks so different, which is crazy to me because like numbers don't lie, obviously. Like records like that don't lie. You're getting them from the banks directly. So like what's there is there. You just didn't read it right. Again, according to Down to the Bone, Chase Merritt had been systematically stealing from Joseph for years.
Oh.
Tens of thousands of dollars siphoned off through forged checks, altered invoices, and unauthorized withdrawals. But here's the key detail that investigators noted. The theft escalated right before the murders. And Joseph probably noticed. He had even confronted Chase about it and tightened control of his finances. Remember, I said he had opened that new bank account. It wasn't just to get away from Dan, because he was trying to get away from Dan. He was trying to get away from Dan's control. It wasn't just about Dan.
Mm-hmm.
Investigators re-examined Chase Merritt's movements around February 4th. Cell phone data placed him near the McStay family home that day. Now, what I remember of cell phone towers is that they ping off of nearest ones, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it's not always accurate, what I've learned from prior cases. At one point, though, his phone stopped registering all activity. And it was a gap that prosecutors would later argue coincided with the murders. When he was questioned again about it, Chase's explanation basically shifted. He suddenly couldn't remember specifics. He was contradicting earlier statements he had made, and he was downplaying any conflict he had with Joseph. Remember, Joseph had met with him that day of the disappearance. So that was the conflict that they were talking about, like the confrontation that they had talked about. And he had called his mom after. I remember he said like he wasn't really feeling good and he was going home. He had an argument with Chase that day. He was basically supposed to have been firing him that day. Chase doesn't say it like that. The detectives just kept pressing harder though. And the harder they pressed, Chase just decided to stop talking. This is the man who could not shut up for years. For 3 years. He suddenly had nothing left to say. Like could not, just yapped.
Oh my god.
And now he's like, no, I'm not talking anymore.
What the hell?
So investigators focused on the burial site. The Mojave location wasn't random like we had said.
Mm-hmm.
Apparently, Chase had been known to ride dirt bikes and spend time in remote desert areas, so he was familiar with the terrain. Comfortable there, even, you might say. This was important because whoever had buried the McStays there had probably known the area, had access to it, felt confident that they weren't going to be interrupted, and the pool of suspects was small. And when I say the detectives did relook at everything, they did re-interview everybody. They re-interviewed family members, friends, business associates, Dan Kavanaugh. Like, they re-interviewed everybody. And it was all looked at with a new understanding. Statements that once seemed benign now sounded rehearsed, defensive, and consistent. But to detectives, Chase's earlier interviews stood out the most. So they re-looked at everything and they said, this is weird, this is weird, this is weird. This doesn't sound right to me. But Chase, his interview stood out the most. Remember, he talked about them in past tense. And he also had a fixation on Summer. Remember, there was so much that he had talked about Summer having an issue with her ex, how the ex was like abusive. He was in the Army or Marine or something like that. And there was just a lot of negative attention based on her. And it wasn't, I will say, it wasn't just Chase. Michael did this a lot too. He talked a lot about Summer badly in those interviews. And I understand he didn't have the best relationship with her, but there was a lot of negative focus on her, which I think is just, I get it, you didn't have a good relationship with her, but in this instance, I don't really see how that was relevant.
It's not relevant. I'm sorry, she's dead.
Even in the initial missing thing.
Yeah.
Why would she just go if she did something or had anything to do with it, or anybody on her end had anything to do with it? Why would she also go missing with them?
You know what I'm saying? Doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, I think they just focused way too much on that. He had also casually dismissed concerns. According to Rother, detectives began to view Chase not as a worried friend, but as somebody actively shaping the narrative from the beginning. Remember, he tried to play the victim a lot. That he was just left high and dry without money. Dan Kavanaugh, like I had said, had also been revisited. His hacking, the PayPal transfer, the business dispute. But his alibi held. Travel records confirmed that he was in Hawaii when this all happened. So investigators could not place him anywhere near the McStays at that time of the murder.
Wow.
The cartel theory, no evidence. Strangers, no sign of forced entry. No theft. Once again, the case circled back to the same person. By 2014, investigators had a working theory. Joseph confronted Chase over stolen money. The confrontation escalated. Joseph was killed. Summer and the boys were murdered to eliminate the witnesses. The bodies were transported and buried in the desert. The disappearance was staged to look voluntary. It wasn't elegant, it wasn't brutal, and it explained everything. In November 2014, nearly a year after the remains were found, Charles Chase Merritt was arrested on 4 counts of first-degree murder. What am I, Moira?
Yeah,
from,
you are.
Schitt's Creek.
You are today.
Moira.
Moira.
Special circumstances. No confession. No remorse. Just silence. Every time.
Every time.
It's worse than that. I will just say it's worse than just silence from him, because he is not a silent boy. Finally, what felt like some momentum finally happening, but an arrest is not justice. What followed was a long, grinding legal process that stretched over 5 years, filled with delays, motions, mistrials, and moments where it would just genuinely seem like the case might just fall apart under its own weight. Because again, remember, we don't have any physical evidence here because the house was cleaned.
The house was cleaned.
And they didn't treat it as a homicide or just anything serious. Remember, it took them forever to even actually get a warrant to search the house in the first place, which was just ridiculous.
It was crazy.
Here's the problem the prosecution had. Like I just said, but I'm going to go in a little bit further. There was no murder weapon. no blood-soaked clothes, no eyewitnesses, and no confession. He didn't confess to anything. There was nothing concrete, no smoking gun to pin Chase on these murders, only patterns. That was all the prosecution had to convince the jury that Merritt was the killer. That was all they had. The trial didn't begin until 2016. So, found 2013, Chase arrested 2014, trial began 2016. So we're now 6 years in since they were murdered. 6 years in until they had, like, from when they had gone missing and actually had been murdered. Chase's defense team worked aggressively to suppress evidence. They challenged forensic handling and painted the investigation as sloppy and biased from the start. And to be fair, they weren't wrong about one thing. The early handling of McStay's case had been a complete mess. We have said this over and over again. The house wasn't secured. Evidence was compromised. Joseph's own mother is the one to blame for that. Susan literally cleaned the house. I can't, scream it enough, you know? The defense made it clear, though, they planned to put law enforcement on trial, too. The defense was going to go after them and say, you did not do your job, and now you're trying to hang my client for this. When opening statements finally began, prosecutors laid out a simple plan, a simple but brutal theory. Joseph McStay discovered Chase Merritt had been stealing from him. Joseph confronted Chase. Chase snapped. What followed wasn't a clean crime. It was rage. Joseph was killed first, Summer killed next, and the boys last because they were witnesses. The prosecution argued that Chase then staged the scene to look like a voluntary disappearance, dumped the family car near the border. I don't know what's wrong with me right now. And buried the bodies in a desert area he knew well. Their case wasn't about how Chase did it. It was about why he did it. The backbone of the prosecution's case was financial evidence. Jurors were shown bank statements, forged checks, and financial timelines that spanned years. They saw checks written from Joseph's business account to Chase, forged signatures, payments dated after February 4th, 2010. So he had written himself checks as Joseph and dated them for after February 4th. After they had disappeared. This was evidence enough that Chase was financially desperate. One prosecutor put it bluntly, Joseph McStay was cutting him off, and Chase couldn't afford that. Literally. Next came the digital trial. Cell phone records placed Chase near the McStay home on February 4th. Then, crucially, his phone went silent for a period of time. Prosecutors argue that time gap coincided with the murders. They also highlighted that Chase's internet searches included, how long does it take for a body to decompose?
I don't understand why people do this.
I'm not even going to say anything because I don't know. No.
Why? Why would you look that up?
Stupid
idiot
is what you are. And I'm glad you're stupid, but stupid is what you are. The defense tried to dismiss this as a coincidence. How do you defend that? How? How is that a coincidence? Was he in the middle of filming a podcast and needed the information?
No.
Was that it? Because I don't understand. But stacked together, those were not coincidences, coinkydinks, if you will, because I can't speak. They didn't look like any kind of accident. It wasn't an accident. Jurors heard recordings and testimonies about Chase's earlier interviews with detectives. So, they heard it all. They heard how he spoke in those early interviews and how he referred to Joseph in past tense. Remember, he was he said something about Joseph in past tense, and then Dugal was like, oh, so why are you talking about him like that? You just said past tense. Is there a reason? Is he not? Do you know something about him not being here? And he was like, I did. And he was like, yeah, you've done it multiple times now. And he was like, no, I didn't mean to do that.
Bro, guilty conscience comes through, you dumb fuck.
Yeah. Literally.
Sorry.
Literally. His story about the lunch meeting kept changing. This is what I mean by saying that, like, he was probably getting fired and doesn't want to admit that because it makes him look really bad. Prosecutors argued Chase wasn't slipping up. They argued he was just revealing himself. And of course, Chase's attorneys came out swinging. They argued that there was no physical evidence that tied Chase to the murders, no DNA linking him to the burial site, the house had been irreparably contaminated, and the investigation focused too narrowly on Chase. The defense offered alternative suspects, like Dan Kavanaugh, for instance. Drug cartel theories, even members of the McStay family were subtly implied to have interfered with evidence. I don't really know how you can be subtle about that, but okay. The defense repeatedly reminded jurors suspicion is not proof. While that is true, you can use financial records to kind of help you. It's a long shot, but it does happen. One of the most difficult moments in the trial came when forensic experts testified about Gianni and Joseph Jr. Prosecutors were careful. They didn't sensationalize. They didn't linger. They didn't have to. The jurors basically just understood. At one point, the courtroom reportedly went silent, not from shock, but from heavier disbelief. I couldn't possibly imagine sitting there and listening to what might have happened to those little boys. I'm sitting here telling you this, and I still can't believe it. The entire trial took place over a period of 5 months. And I'm not glossing over the kid thing. It's just hard for me to talk about because I have my own child, and like I just in period and talking about children is hard. Yeah. So we're just gonna keep going from that because I don't want to stick on that. It's very despicable. It's disgusting, and it makes me want to throw up. Like I've said 1,000 times, I just can't. I don't want to think about that. Yeah. And we're not gonna get into details about anything, but the jury basically just when they heard it, that was enough for them. On that too. So the jury, so it took place, like I was saying, over a period of 5 months, the whole trial. The jury took 7 days to deliberate. So technically it was 2 weeks because of the way that their deliberation days worked out. So it was technically 2 weeks, but 7 days of actual deliberation. Finally, on June 10th, 2019, so I just want to put this into perspective, February 4th, 2010 is when they technically went missing. That was the last day that they were seen at all. To June 10th, 2019, guys, that is 9 years it took for a guilty verdict to be reached and somebody to be tried.
That's ridiculous.
On all four, so bad. All 4 counts, the trial entered its final phase, sentencing. So Chase Merritt was found guilty on all 4 counts of homicide. Sentencing, the prosecution sought the death penalty. Family members gave victim impact statements. Susan Blake spoke. Patrick McStay spoke. Joseph's teenage son, Elijah, that we had talked about, he did speak there. I feel very horrible for him. He's like he's without, 2 of his siblings and his dad. Even Michael spoke. Michael did speak at it. And I know that I've raised some questions about him. He did speak, and I did see it, and it was very tearful. I will say that. It looked very legitimate from what I saw. And their words weren't about vengeance. It was just about their loss. Chase Merritt did not apologize. He did not accept responsibility about it. In fact, he has maintained his innocence and still does. Even as he was sentenced to death, he showed little emotion. According to observers, he barely reacted at all. In June 2019, the jury sentenced Charles Chase Merritt to death for the murder of Joseph Summer, Gianni, and Joseph Jr. McStay. After nearly a decade, the legal process ended. Or so everyone thought. Because that wasn't the end of it. Almost immediately Merritt's attorneys filed automatic appeals, which is standard in California death penalty cases. I honestly didn't realize that California still had like capital punishment.
Yeah, I didn't either.
So when I was doing that, I don't know why I didn't realize that either. So when I was doing this case, I was like, I didn't realize that they still had death penalty, but that's very interesting. These appeals weren't necessarily about the murders that happened. Everyone agrees that they did happen. It's just about how the case was investigated, how the evidence was handled, and whether Chase actually received a fair trial. Chase himself and his lawyers don't believe that he did. They think he was basically ramrodded. As of now, Chase Merritt remains on California's death row, housed at San Quentin. Though California has a moratorium on executions, that means no execution date has been set and realistically may never be. So like these people basically just sit on like death row for ever and ever and ever. Death penalty appeals in California can take decades. So the process includes automatic review by the California Supreme Court, habeas corpus petitions, and potential federal appeals. And during that time, Merritt continues to maintain his innocence, which leaves this case in a strange and very uncomfortable place. A jury found him guilty but beyond a reasonable doubt. 4 people are dead, 2 of which are children, and yet there are still questions no appeal can answer. Because whether Chase Merritt, for all intents and purposes, metaphorically pulled the trigger or not, the McStay family is gone. And nothing about this appeals process is going to bring them back. It's literally just about Chase at this point and like whether it was fair. But this is just dragging along the family as far into this as they can. And like it's just horrible that like they're not going to get peace from this. Also, like I had mentioned, Chase is in that documentary, Two Shallow Graves. So he had actually, I think I mentioned this in the first episode, he had actually hired a production company or production crew to start it.
Right.
But nobody wanted to be a part of it. Patrick wouldn't be a part of it. Michael wouldn't be a part. Like nobody, a family friend who's in that did not want to be a part of it. And then it ended up getting sold to Discovery, who then now has an unbiased, standpoint. And Patrick and some family friends and other people and detectives had decided, okay, we'll talk now, because this is not just about Chase. This is about the McStays, period. I will say it does make Michael look very suspicious, and I still think he looks kind of suspicious in my opinion. While I do say, and like this is all alleged, of course. While I do say that, like, seeing him talk about his brother and his brother's family at the trial, at like the victim reading or the victim family impact, while it did obviously like look very, heartfelt, he just rubs me the wrong way.
I agree.
Dan Kavanaugh rubs me the wrong way. I don't believe a thing that comes out of that guy's mouth. It's just all very sketchy. And Chase just doesn't shut up, which just makes him look even sketchier, honestly.
I don't know. The whole thing is just, you need to watch the documentary. You need to see the court, and you need to look into Chase's eyes during the court and see what he looks like while he's on trial, because like that's a guilty man.
Literally just blank
stare.
How many times have we seen a killer like just sit there completely blank while like hearing these things, and like for somebody to have claimed to have been like his best friend, wouldn't you have some kind of like wouldn't you feel a little bit more like upset or want to show a little bit more emotion?
Wouldn't you
want
I don't to know. Try
maybe that's just me
to seem like you're upset about it?
Yeah, like and upset that like if you are being ramrodded, like be upset that you are being ramrodded. Granted, we've seen time and time again like people be on trial who are not supposed to be on trial, and also kind of look like this because they're just pissed off at that point. And
Totally.
like they don't want to have more emotion because if they have more emotion it looks worse. And I get that. I hear you. I just don't, when you really just look at him on this trial because you'll understand. And I highly recommend this book, Down to the Bone. There's so much more information in here that she gives you. Like she does talk quite a bit about Summer and her background and her family and like why they kept bringing her up in the beginning and like why they brought up her ex. Like she talks about it a bit more, and I absolutely love that because I think in the whole media circus of this case, like Summer herself is kind of just lost, especially because like Joseph's family didn't like her that much. But I highly recommend it. It's very good. It was a very good read.
Yeah.
So let us know what you guys think, what you feel. If you think maybe Chase is the one that did it, or if you think that there was some accomplices along the way, because again, remember, I still will hold on to the fact that even though I think that Susan had good intentions of cleaning the house, it is sketchy as shit.
Why would you clean a crime scene?
I'll never let that go.
I'll never let that go either. There's a few other things that I'll never let go, but you gotta watch the documentary.
There's a lot of sketchy things that are in there. But yeah. Whether it's crime, conspiracy, or straight up spooky, we're gonna keep talking about it. Like, follow, comment, and stay tuned for new episodes each week because it'll just keep getting dark and spooky from here. And if you want your own story told, send us in your story to goreandgossippod@gmail.com so we can do your story. So stay nosy and stay spooky, and we'll see you next time. Bye, guys.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.